So I lost my job recently, and doesn't sound like a great way to start this video, but just bear with me. I have more time on my hands, and I've been watching a lot of movies lately, especially like movies on Tubi because Tubi's free. I didn't realize how extensive their film and TV library is. Like a lot of really niche things on there. Lots of international films, lots of anime, lots of older movies and shows like classics, which I love. So basically I've been checking out a lot of things that I wouldn't necessarily have time for in the past, and yeah, I wanted to like kind of do a series talking about some of the movies I've watched recently. So I just finished one called When the Wind Blows. It's from '86. It's animated, and it's basically about this older British couple preparing for nuclear war. The husband is at the library. He's retired, also has more time on his hands. So he's going to the library and reading up on current events, and he's hearing like, oh, they're talking about how like there's going to be nuclear war and somebody's going to drop a bomb and we don't know who, but we need to be prepared. The first half of it is introducing you to the couple themselves. He seems like he's very well intentioned. He doesn't think as critically as he probably should. His wife is a little bit more cynical. She's kind of interesting because she does not understand what's going on, and she doesn't try to for most of the film. The first half, he's talking about like, we need to get ready, we need to take all these precautions. He ends up taking all the doors off of their home to build their little shelter, which is just like the doors slanted against a wall like this, and like a row of doors, like 4 doors, and they get inside it. There's no door on it, there's nothing like closing them in but it's just like this, and they're inside it in here, and that's it. And that's what's on the pamphlet, and says that that's supposed to protect them. So he takes all the doors off, and she's like, well, don't scratch my paint. Like that's what her focus is. Like you gotta pick a side. It's either you believe that it's gonna happen and you let the man do what he has to do, or you don't believe it and you say something. But she's just like, I accept that we're going to war and a bomb is gonna be dropped on us, but you're gonna scratch my paint job on the wall. It's ridiculous, and there's so much of that. They end up both being really out of touch. As things progress, you really start to see like how little of a grasp they have on the situation. She, like I said, she's not really trying to understand. He's talking to her and telling her what he's heard and what he thinks is going to happen. She doesn't ask questions that she should definitely be asking. Your partner is telling you there's going to be nuclear war. A nuclear bomb is going to be dropped on you. You should be asking more questions, because she clearly doesn't understand. They were both children during World War II. Because they were children at the time, their experience is it's weird. They're nostalgic about it. She talks about how she used to play in her parents' shelter that they had in the yard, and that they had flowers growing over the top of it. And it shows her as a child playing in there. And with him, he's like, yeah, I used to read books in our shelter, and I had all these pinup girls on the walls. So they're nostalgic about World War II. But it's because they're children. But there's a line that they say, basically it's them talking about how like who's going to war with who, and who are the good guys and bad guys. There are numerous times where they forget who the enemy is. In this case, they're talking about Russia bombing them, right? But they keep referring to the Russians as like Germany. And then they correct themselves. And then there are times later on in the film when they don't correct themselves. Like they've forgotten who they're at war with. There is a line though, because like I said, they're older and they're out of touch, and they haven't really needed to pay attention to current events. They're an older couple living in the countryside, and they just choose to sort of like That's the outside world. I'm not worrying about it. And so there's a moment where I think it's the wife. She says, like, you knew what you stood for. And it reminded me of a really similar sentiment expressed in the version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy that came out a few years ago. The character of Connie says something similar. And George Smiley, like, immediately responds with, like, it was the war, though. And she says, like, but at least you knew who you were fighting. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, if you haven't seen it, it's the Cold War. And Connie and Smiley, they've both worked for MI6. So her nostalgia is really, like, just for things to have been clearer. And she does at least have somebody who's like, yeah, but kind of a similar sentiment expressed by the wife in When the Wind Blows, but there's nobody to be like, hey, it's kind of weird that you're missing a time of war when a lot of people died. They're both very chipper at the thought and the memory of World War II. In their case, they were kids. You miss the idea of being a child, not having too many worries. The adults are worrying about things for you. You can just feel very patriotic about the whole thing. But it's also a little bit weird not having that other voice there is like, hey, maybe, wait a minute. So again, especially like the first half of the movie, when you're being introduced to these characters, there are moments when they'll say things. They say boomer things. They say white boomer things. There's a point where the wife says, like they're talking about the three big heroes from World War II, right? There's Churchill, lots of bad stuff there. FDR and Stalin. This woman says, like, yeah, I like that Joseph Stalin. He had such a lovely mustache. They don't say anything negative about Stalin at all. And it's like, it's been long enough. There's no way that you don't know. But they're just speaking in glowing terms, and they don't have to worry about reality. They don't have to worry about people being hurt when it didn't affect them directly. That's one thing about this movie. These are very realistic characters. They feel like real people with all of the problems that go with it. I genuinely do not believe that those characters were intended to be likable. There are certain things that they do that I like, that I think are cute, quirky. Like I said, they're an older couple and they do old people things, and sometimes that's gonna be very cute. There is this kind of funny little, he'll get like patriotic and be like, oh, maybe I'll be called up to do something and I'll be called up to serve, and she'll be like, oh, you're far too old for that. But ultimately there's more there that has me like, you're kind of a lot. You're just kind of whitewashing history. You're ignoring the things that are not convenient to the worldview that you want to have. It's not good. I do not like these characters, but I cannot stress enough, they are so realistic. They feel like real people. You cannot convince me that the writers did not base this couple not on like an amalgamation of whoever, but like specific people that the writers knew. Basically, in the first half is the preparations, some of which don't really make sense. They have pamphlets about the impending war and what to do, and he has some that are from the city council and some that are from the government, and there's conflicting information. That feels very real. That feels like a thing that would happen. The bomb does go off. They're able to get in their little shelter. They have a little mattress in there. They have a few supplies. One sticking point was that he was very insistent on, like, we're gonna have to have a facility, we're gonna have to have like a thing to go into, and she's like, that's uncivilized, I'm going to use the restroom. And he's like, you can't, we have to stay in the shelter. And she's like, no. And it's a thing that keeps coming up. So they go in, bomb goes off, they're both naturally very upset, but it actually does protect them from the initial blast. Of course, loads of damage to their house. Actually, their house is something I want to talk about really quick. Is something that you notice early on. The characters are, it's like hand-drawn animation, but when there's something that they've been interacting with and they put it down, it's no longer animated, so it's like part of a miniature. Like the first time that he comes in and he takes his coat off, he hangs it on a hook, and now his coat is made out of felt. If there's something that they're not currently like interacting with, a lot of the things in the background are like actual objects. And that is kind of used to pretty cool effect later on in the film. After the initial blast, they go to bed because like what else are they gonna do? It got dark, just like this movie's about to. Where we left off, the couple was spending their first night in the shelter. The next day, they wake up, they talk for a while. He is like, oh, well, I got this from the library, and it talks all about, you know, the organizations that are in place in case of a nuclear event. And he just launches into this full info dump for like minutes at a time. I think that was pretty much the second day, and they go back to bed. The third day, they wake up, and she's like, I am so exhausted, and I feel terrible, and I ache all over. And like, as the viewer, you're like, oh fuck. She knows even less than he does, which is scary because there's a lot of things he doesn't know. He might know names of things, he might have like a vague idea, but he's so ignorant of so many important things that when they start showing symptoms of radiation poisoning, he doesn't know what's happening. They wake up, they're both feeling bad, and without another thought, they just leave the shelter and they start walking around and just checking the damage to the house. They're out for hours, literally hours, just doing their thing. And she leaves the room for a minute, and he suddenly remembers, oh, we weren't supposed to leave, which is fucking wild. You've been going on about this for days, but that's sort of like your first hint at like they are losing cognitive function. So he sort of panics and he's like, well, I hope everything's okay. I remember something about radiation poisoning, but I don't remember what it's supposed to look like. And she says something like, well, if you can't see it, it can't do any harm to you, can it? And whew. So they go back in the shelter. The next day they wake up, again, feeling bad, feeling worse. She's like, I threw up 3 times in the night. And he's like, yeah, I've been really sick too. But good news, I checked the pamphlet. Initially he thought they were supposed to be in the shelter for like 2 weeks. And he's like, I just checked. It actually says 48 hours, so we're fine. They're not fine. Their symptoms are getting worse and worse, and it's really fucking sad. They're not inherently likable characters. They don't have a lot going on that you really want to root for. There's a point where he starts questioning, like, do we even know who won the war? We know that we got nuked, but like, could that have been one of our allies? Could that have been the Americans and they accidentally got us and it didn't make it to Russia? That happened in the war before, friendly fire and all that. If it was the Russians, did the Russians win the war? If they come here, are we going to be put in a concentration camp? She responds by saying, well, why would they do that? We haven't done anything. And my first thought was, yeah, neither did anybody else. That's how they work. That's how concentration camps work. You don't have to do anything to get locked up in one. She says, we're not Jews. Like, oh, you're, like, I knew you were like here, but you're here. You're like, they were praising Stalin. They were praising Churchill. You barely had energy to get out of bed, but you got energy for this. Of course you do. And he didn't seem surprised, so it's like, yeah, fuck both of you. They're not likable characters. They're not good people. There aren't really redeeming qualities. That there isn't anything that outdoes the bad. Even if I don't like the characters, it is still difficult to watch what happens to them. Like I said, they feel like real people. Watching characters who feel that real go through that kind of suffering, it's not just like the physical pain, it's the fear and the uncertainty. And then near the end of the film, that uncertainty becomes certainty, and that's really painful to watch too. They go out for a walk in the garden. So they step outside and, you know, everything's like burnt to a crisp. They're not overly surprised by it. You shouldn't be surprised by it, but you seem to think that something might be out there for you to eat, so I don't know. It starts raining at a point. And so he's like, hey, this'll be great. We can collect rainwater. And they do. And then they boil it a little bit to kill any germs. And sure enough, they drink the rainwater. Their conditions continue to decline rapidly. They're so out of touch. It is so wild to see because they fully understand that a bomb has gone off, but they'll still say things like, oh, the postman's late. It's weird that he hasn't come today. The newspaper's late too. It's weird that the milkman hasn't come yet. Like, it was stressing me out watching it because I was like, are they gonna figure it out? They didn't. At one point he says that he had been planning to go to the pub to have a pint. And basically, like, he thinks that the pub is still there and that the person he was gonna go and meet is still there, but he doesn't have a way to, like, let him know that the plans were canceled or something. And his wife responds, oh, he's probably so busy with his cows, you know, after the bomb. You have some awareness, but it is so selective. And she makes a comment about how she's wondering whether or not the bomb affected the cows. And what she says is she wonders if it put them off their laying. And a minute later, she corrects herself and she says, oh, I mean the milking. They had just finished eating dinner, and while she is saying that, she has gone and picked up her dishes, moved them into the kitchen, and she's cleaning them. He doesn't miss a beat. While continuing this conversation with her, he picks up his dishes, goes over to the garbage bin, places his dishes in the garbage, and just continues the conversation. There is no point when he realizes that he's just done something wrong. And that's another moment where you realize they're really losing cognitive function. Like, it's really starting to affect them practically. They continue to deteriorate. And then one day it just shows them she's lying on a mattress on the floor and he's lying on the couch. He is losing his vision and isn't telling her. She is coughing really heavily. She panics because she starts to notice that there's spots on her leg. She starts losing her hair. And he's already figured it out. He's already realized. But he is trying to stay chipper for her. And he's just like, oh, that's nothing to worry about. I'm sure those spots, it's just varicose veins. It's not anything you have to look at. Look, I have it on my arm too. It's perfectly normal for people our age. It's totally fine. You don't have anything to worry about. And eventually she kind of figures that out. And she doesn't call attention to it. They do clearly care for each other. And she sort of realizes, like I said, that he's just trying to keep her calm, and so she plays along. She says that they should go back in the shelter, just in case. And so they go, they cover themselves with these bags. They had these sacks that was supposed to protect them from something. I don't know if it was supposed to protect them from fallout or what. She says, like, we should go put the bags back on and get back in the shelter. It's this really sad scene because they step into one sack and they put another over their heads. She says, like, that it smells funny in the sacks, and he says, like, oh, well, now you know what it feels like to be a potato. And she says, like, yeah, I'd hate to be buried in the ground. And he doesn't miss a beat. He's like, oh, me too. The cremation for me any day. And she's like, yeah, I feel the same way. And that's about as close as they come to talking about it without actually talking about it. So they get back in the shelter and the movie ends. I thought this film was done so well. There's so few examples of where I can say all those things about a film and say I really disliked the main characters because they don't have to be likable. I don't think that they were designed to be likable. I think that they're very realistic. You wouldn't necessarily want to be around those people because they're the kind of people who will say something and it's like, oh, Stalin, really? But again, like, I think it was handled so well that you can tell a story that well, that emotionally, and you don't have to be rooting for the main characters. You can still feel bad that they're experiencing the suffering that they are. I thought it was excellently done. I would rate it probably. It doesn't have a lot of rewatchability for me. That really affects like how I rate a movie, is like whether or not I want to watch it again. Like, first half of it is just like these characters being sort of ridiculous, and then the second half is like it unfolds legitimately. It unfolds like a horror story. So remember I said that the way that the background functions is like it's a lot of real items, and then they interact with something and it's like drawn. They stop interacting with it and it becomes like a real item now, like something sitting on a shelf or what have you. When they are on like their last day and he's on the couch and she's on the mattress on the floor, they're under blankets. The blankets are not drawn. They are like actual physical items that are there. And it just made me think like, yeah, that kind of shows like that their impact on the world around them is fading. Like, it's almost like they're not there, like they're not interacting with these items anymore. And I thought that was a really, really cool touch. Yeah, I would recommend it as a one-time watch. I would give it, out of 10, I would probably give it a 7.8. The animation was lovely. The voice acting was great. Like, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like, I don't know how to really say this, but like, you know, a lot of times you'll watch like something animated and it's like that person's giving a performance. This felt like real people. Like, if this were a stage play or it were a live action film, I would expect the same performance. Like, just the way that the actors for the couple did their performance was so real. It was so natural. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's a very heavy watch. Do not watch it when you're sad. So that's my first video in this series. There will be more. Definitely download the Tubi app. It's free. You don't even need to make an account. No, I'm not sponsored. I would definitely recommend checking it out. Lots of really good stuff on there, and hopefully this series will point to more things that you might want to check out. Almost forgot. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Especially subscribe for more of these videos if you want to see me doing more, likely from my car. Hopefully not at night. This does not look great. Okay, thank you.